Princess Diana kept secret diaries documenting everything, every lie, every manipulation, every threat from the royal family during her marriage. When the divorce began, the palace hunted desperately for those diaries, knowing they contained enough truth to destroy reputations. They never found them. Years later, when the palace accused Diana of leaking state secrets and dragged her to court to silence her forever, those diaries surfaced. What they revealed in that courtroom shook the entire establishment to its core. November 1995, rain streaked down the windows of Kensington Palace as Diana sat at her private desk, pen trembling in her hand. The divorce negotiations had turned vicious. That afternoon, she'd endured another meeting where palace lawyers treated her like a problem to be managed, rather than a person who'd served the crown for 15 years. She opened the leather-bound journal she'd been keeping since 1985, 10 years of careful documentation, dates, times, direct quotes from conversations, every threat disguised as advice, every manipulation presented as protocol, every lie told to the press about her mental state. Diana had learned early in her marriage that memory wasn't enough. The palace would simply deny. They'd call her hysterical, confused, unwell, so she'd started writing it all down, every single thing. November 14th, 1995, she wrote, Sir Anthony Blackwood told me today that if I continue to make trouble during the divorce, they'll ensure I'm painted as an unfit mother. He said the boys would be better off without my influence. Direct quote, "We have psychiatrists who will testify to your instability." She paused, blinking back tears, then continued, Lord Christopher Hayes added that any attempt to tell my side would be considered a breach of a royal confidentiality. They're building a cage around me with threats. Diana had filled 6 journals over the years, every volume carefully dated, every entry backed by documentation where possible, copies of threatening letters, photographs of injuries explained away as accidents, recordings of conversations she'd made for her own protection. But she wasn't naive. She knew that if the palace found these diaries, they'd disappear. Evidence couldn't exist if it was destroyed. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized years ago. Rebecca, it's me. I need to see you. Tonight. Rebecca Thornton had been Diana's friend since before the royal wedding, one of the few people whose loyalty had never wavered. She worked as a librarian at a small private collection in Oxford, a quiet life far from London's scrutiny. They'd kept their friendship deliberately low profile precisely for moments like this. That evening, Diana drove herself to Oxford in an unmarked car, no security detail. In Rebecca's modest flat above a bookshop, she handed over all 6 journals. If anything happens to me, Diana said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. These need to be made public. Everything in them is true. Everything is documented. Rebecca held the journals like they were made of glass. You're scaring me. What's happening? They're trying to erase me, make me disappear into history as the unstable princess who couldn't handle royal life. Diana's hands shook as she accepted a cup of tea. But I won't let them. These journals prove everything I've said, every single accusation I've made about how they operate. It's all in there, with evidence. They'll be safe, Rebecca promised. I'll hide them where no one will think to look. Over the next few months, the divorce became a public bloodbath. Palace sources leaked stories painting Diana as paranoid, vindictive, impossible to work with. Tabloids ran headlines about her mental breakdowns and erratic behavior. Sir Anthony Blackwood quietly authorized searches of every property Diana had access to. They tore through Kensington Palace when she was away. They searched her car, her office, even her gym locker. Where are they? Blackwood demanded during one hostile meeting. We know you've been keeping records. Diana met his eyes calmly. I don't know what you're talking about. Those documents are royal property. My private thoughts in a diary? Interesting legal theory. Blackwood knew the diaries existed, and he knew they were dangerous enough to bring down senior members of the royal household, himself included. The smear campaign intensified. Dr. Elizabeth Montgomery, Diana's physician, was pressured to release medical records. When she refused, the palace made her life difficult. Martin Pierce, a journalist Diana trusted, published a piece suggesting she'd been manipulating the media after the palace paid him $50,000. One by one, her support system was dismantled. They're isolating you, Rebecca warned. Classic abuser tactics. I know, Diana whispered, but those journals are the only proof I have that I'm not crazy. In Oxford, Rebecca had hidden the journals in the library's rare books vault, mixed with 18th century collections where no one would think to look. The divorce was finalized in August 1996. Diana lost her Royal Highness title. She kept some access to William and Harry, but under conditions that felt like supervised visits. She thought the worst was over. She was wrong. In March 1997, Blackwood orchestrated his final play. He leaked information that Diana had been compromising state security by keeping unauthorized records. A formal investigation was opened. Diana was summoned to testify before a closed tribunal. "They're putting me on trial for keeping a diary?" Diana asked her lawyer. "They're claiming you recorded conversations without consent, copied confidential documents. Without the actual diaries, we can't prove what they contained. It's your word against the palace." Diana felt the trap closing. Admit the diaries existed and they'd subpoena them. Deny they existed and she'd be branded a liar. Either way, she lost. The tribunal was scheduled for June 1997. If found guilty, she could face restrictions on public activities, supervised only visits with her sons, complete severance from royal duties. They were going to erase her entirely. The night before, Diana called Rebecca. "I need to use them. The diaries, it's the only way." "Once they're public, there's no taking it back." Diana laughed bitterly. "They're destroying me anyway. At least this way, the truth comes out." The tribunal was held in a private government building in Westminster. No press, no public, just Diana, her lawyer, 3 judges, and a panel of royal experts who'd been carefully selected by Blackwood. Lord Christopher Hayes presented the case against Diana with cold precision. He showed forged evidence of Diana supposedly selling stories to tabloids. He brought forward witnesses who'd been coerced into testifying about her unstable behavior. He painted a picture of a bitter, vindictive woman who'd become so obsessed with hurting the royal family that she'd compromised national security. Diana's lawyer fought back, but without hard evidence, it was her word against a coordinated campaign by people with unlimited resources. Judge Victoria Ashford listened with barely concealed impatience. "Ms. Hainwo Spencer, did you or did you not keep unauthorized records of private royal conversations?" Diana took a breath. "I kept a personal diary, as millions of people do." "And did this personal diary contain sensitive information about royal operations?" "It contained my experiences, my thoughts, things that happened to me." Hayes stood. "Your Honor, the defendant is being evasive because she knows these so-called diaries contain damaging fabrications. She's been making wild accusations for years about being monitored, threatened, manipulated." "Evaluations I never consented to," Diana shot back. "Done by psychiatrists I never met." Judge Ashford frowned. "Ms. High Spencer, do these diaries exist or not?" Diana felt the moment crystallize. "They exist," she said quietly. The room erupted in whispers. Hayes smiled triumphantly. "Then they must be submitted to this tribunal immediately," Judge Ashford declared. "I don't have them," Diana said. Ms. Spencer, you're under oath." The tribunal room doors opened. Rebecca Thornton walked in, carrying a leather satchel. Every head turned. Diana's breath caught. Rebecca walked calmly to the front of the room and placed the satchel on the defense table. "Your Honor, I'm Rebecca Thornton. I'm here to submit evidence that I believe is relevant to these proceedings." Hayes was on his feet instantly. "This is highly irregular. Who is this woman?" "I'm a friend of Diana's, and I've been safeguarding these for her protection." Rebecca opened the satchel and pulled out all 6 journals. "These are Princess Diana's personal diaries covering 1985 through 1996. She gave them to me for safekeeping because she feared they would be destroyed by the very people who are now trying to paint her as unstable." Judge Ashford reached for the first journal. "These should have been submitted through proper channels." "They would have disappeared through proper channels," Rebecca interrupted, "just like every other piece of evidence that didn't fit the narrative the palace wanted to tell." Diana's lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, we'd like to submit these journals as evidence in my client's defense. They document systematic abuse, manipulation, and threats over more than a decade." Hayes moved to block it. "These are clearly fabricated. Convenient that they suddenly appear now. Every entry is dated and cross-referenced with documented events," Rebecca said calmly. "Dates of official engagements where threatening conversations occurred. Copies of letters sent to Diana. In some cases, she made audio recordings to protect herself, transcripts of which are included with corresponding dates." Judge Ashford opened the first journal, reading silently. Her expression shifted from skepticism to shock to horror. The entry she was reading was from December 1985, just after William's birth. Diana had documented a conversation where a senior royal aide had told her that if she continued to be difficult about public appearances while recovering from childbirth, they would find a doctor who understands that postnatal depression can last years. It was a threat, documented in real time, with the exact date it occurred, a date that matched Diana's official calendar showing a private meeting with that same aide. Judge Ashford looked up at Blackwood, who'd gone pale. "Sir Anthony, you were present at this meeting?" Blackwood stammered. That's taken entirely out of context." "It's a direct quote," Rebecca said. "Diana recorded the conversation. The full audio is available if needed." For the next 3 hours, the tribunal poured through the journals. Entry after entry, year after year, documented exactly what Diana had been saying all along, that she'd been systematically manipulated, threatened, and gaslit by the very institution she'd served. There were records of being told her mental health concerns would be used against her in custody hearings, documentation of media leaks that could only have come from inside the palace, evidence of forged medical reports, proof of financial manipulation, and most damning of all, a recorded conversation from November 1995 where Blackwood himself had said, "If she continues to be a problem, we'll make sure the public sees her as unstable. We have enough doctors and journalists in our pocket to make it stick." The tribunal room was silent except for pages turning. Hayes tried to salvage the situation. "Even if these entries are genuine, are you suggesting they're not?" Judge Ashford's voice was ice. "I'm suggesting that this is one person's interpretation of events, backed by dates, times, recordings, and cross-referenced documentation." Rebecca added, "Every major entry has corresponding evidence." Judge Ashford closed the final journal and looked at Diana, and for the first time her expression held something like respect mixed with horror. "Ms. Howes-Spencer, why didn't you present this evidence earlier?" "Because I knew it would disappear," Diana said simply. "They've been searching for these journals since the divorce began. If I'd brought them forward through official channels, they would have been declared confidential royal documents and sealed away forever." The judge turned to Blackwood. "Sir Anthony, did you authorize searches of Ms. Howes-Spencer's private property looking for these journals?" Blackwood's silence was answer enough. "And did you at any point threaten Ms. Howes-Spencer regarding her relationship with her children?" More silence. "Did you coordinate with media outlets to plant stories about her mental stability?" Blackwood stood abruptly. "Your Honor, I refuse to participate in this circus. These proceedings have been compromised. These proceedings have been illuminating," Judge Ashford interrupted. "I'm calling a recess while I consult with my colleagues. But I can tell you right now, this tribunal is over." By evening, the news had leaked. A journalist with integrity, not Martin Pierce, who'd been paid to smear Diana, published the story. Royal Diaries reveal decade of palace manipulation. The public response was immediate and explosive. People who dismissed Diana as paranoid now understood she'd been telling the truth all along. Every accusation she'd made about being threatened, manipulated, monitored, it was all documented with dates and evidence. Sir Anthony Blackwood resigned within a week, though he faced no criminal charges. The palace quietly settled with Diana, restoring many of the rights they'd tried to strip away. Lord Hayes was removed from royal legal representation. Diana held a small private press conference where she was asked why she'd kept such detailed records. "Because I knew that someday someone would try to rewrite my story," she said quietly. "They would say I was difficult, unstable, impossible to work with. They would make me disappear into history as a footnote, the princess who couldn't handle the pressure. I kept these records so that someday people would know the truth, not the version the palace wanted told, but what actually happened." Someone asked if she'd ever considered just walking away, keeping silent, avoiding the fight. Diana's answer was simple. "If I stayed silent, they would have done this to someone else eventually. Maybe to my son's future partners. Maybe to other women who married into the family. Someone had to document it. Someone had to say, this is what they do. This is how they operate, and it's not acceptable." Rebecca stood at the back of the room, watching her friend finally being heard, finally being believed. The journals that had sat hidden in an Oxford library vault for nearly 2 years had done what Diana always hoped they would. They'd told the truth when no one else would. That evening, Diana and Rebecca had dinner at a quiet restaurant far from London. They didn't talk about tribunals or palaces or revelations. They talked about books, about Rebecca's library work, about normal things. "Thank you," Diana said finally, "for keeping them safe, for bringing them when I needed them." Rebecca shook her head. "You were the brave one. You documented everything, knowing it might cost you everything. That's not paranoia, that's survival." Diana looked out the window at London's lights. Somewhere out there, palace officials were scrambling, rewriting policies, covering tracks. But the truth was out now. It couldn't be taken back. "You know what's strange?" Diana said. "I spent years being told I was remembering things wrong, that I was exaggerating, being emotional, misinterpreting innocent comments. They made me doubt my own memory, my own sanity. But I had the journals. Every time I doubted myself, I could go back and read what actually happened. In my own words, written in the moment." "That's what they feared most," Rebecca said. "Not the truth itself, but proof of the truth. Documentation they couldn't argue with or reframe." Diana nodded. They could control narratives, but they couldn't control evidence. Years later, when historians studied Diana's life, those journals became crucial primary sources. They showed how institutions protected themselves at individuals' expense, how gaslighting operated at the highest levels of power. Diana had done something revolutionary. She'd created a record that couldn't be disputed. While the palace told one story, she'd kept receipts for another. And when the moment came, those receipts had saved her. The diaries were eventually housed in the British Library, available to researchers. Each volume a testament to the power of truth, carefully preserved, impossible to deny. And every entry began the same way: the date, the time, and the words, what actually happened. Because in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the palace's version, not the carefully managed narrative. Just the truth, documented in real time, waiting for the day it would be needed. The woman they'd tried to silence had made sure her voice would be heard, not through shouting, but through careful, methodical documentation of every threat, every manipulation, every lie. And that documentation had done what they feared most. It had proven she'd been telling the truth all along,